Have you ever wondered what might be hiding behind a student's silence? When Jamal Washington collapsed in his chemistry class, no one could have predicted the extraordinary truth that would emerge, a revelation that would transform not just his life, but an entire community's understanding of potential, prejudice, and the power of seeing beyond assumptions. What secret talent was this young man concealing beneath his worn clothes and quiet demeanor? The answer will leave you speechless. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published news stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The fluorescent lights of Westridge High's chemistry lab buzzed overhead as Jamal Washington carefully measured sodium hydroxide for the titration experiment. His slender fingers trembled slightly, not from nervousness about the complex procedure, but from the gnawing emptiness that had become his constant companion. 3 days. It had been 3 days since his last proper meal. Mr. Washington, surely you can work faster than that, Ms. Eleanor Winter's voice cut through the quiet concentration of the lab. Her pearl necklace gleamed as she leaned over Jamal's station, her lips pursed in perpetual disappointment. The rest of the class is already recording their results. Yes, ma'am, Jamal murmured, blinking hard as black spots danced at the edges of his vision. He straightened his back, determined to finish. His perfect GPA couldn't afford a failing grade on this experiment. Tiffany Blake giggled from her station across the room, whispering loudly to her lab partner. Probably stayed up all night playing video games. My dad says that's all those kids do. Ms. Winters didn't correct her. Instead, she sighed dramatically and addressed the class. This, students, is why precision and preparation matter in chemistry. Just as in life. Jamal's vision tunneled as he reached for the flask. The room began to tilt. He gripped the edge of the lab table, knuckles whitening with effort. Ms. Winters, he managed to whisper, I don't feel. The floor rushed up to meet him before he could finish. The crash of glassware barely registered as his consciousness slipped away. He awoke to frantic voices and the cool floor against his cheek. Give him space. Coach Rivera's deep voice commanded as he entered the room. Jamal. Can you hear me, son? Jamal's eyes fluttered open to see concerned faces hovering above, except for Ms. Winters, who stood with arms crossed, her expression a mixture of annoyance and suspicion. This is exactly why we have a zero-tolerance drug policy, she declared loudly as Coach Rivera helped Jamal to a sitting position. I've noticed his behavior deteriorating for weeks. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Students drew back, whispering behind their hands. That's not fair, Jamal protested weakly, but his voice was lost as Ms. Winters continued. Or perhaps he simply didn't bother eating breakfast again. Some students simply don't have proper home training about responsibility. Her eyes swept dismissively over his second-hand clothes. As Coach Rivera helped him stand, Jamal felt something worse than hunger clawing at his insides, the shame of 30 pairs of eyes watching, believing the worst about him without knowing a single truth about his life. Let's get you to the nurse, Coach said gently, supporting Jamal's weight. As they left, Ms. Winters called after them, when he's coherent, remind him that the lab report is still due tomorrow. I don't give extensions for irresponsibility. The door closed on her words, but Jamal knew the damage was done. In a school where reputation was everything, Ms. Winters had just branded him. And not one person in that room knew what it had cost him just to be there today. Darkness had settled over the small apartment by the time Jamal returned home. He unlocked the door quietly, hoping not to wake his grandmother if she'd managed to find sleep. That you, baby? Rose Washington's voice called from her bedroom. Even weakened by illness, it carried the warmth that had been Jamal's only constant since his parents' accident 4 years ago. Yes, Grandma. Just getting home. He dropped his backpack and headed to her room, where she sat propped against pillows, prescription bottles lined up on the nightstand like silent sentinels. Her knowing eyes scanned his face. You look tired, child. Nurse's office called. Said you fainted. Jamal lowered himself to the edge of her bed. I'm fine. Just got dizzy for a minute. Don't lie to your grandmother. Her work-worn hand reached for his. When's the last time you ate something real? The question hung between them, heavy with shared knowledge. The refrigerator held little more than condiments and half a carton of milk. Their food stamps wouldn't refresh for another week. I had some crackers at lunch, he offered. Rose's eyes filled. Lord, I never thought I'd see my grandson go hungry. Your daddy would. Daddy would understand, Jamal interrupted gently. The medical bills come first. Your medicine comes first. The silence between them held years of unfairness, the car accident that took her only son and daughter-in-law, the arthritis that ended Rose's career as a home health aide, the system that consistently provided too little, too late. I got paid for the stockroom job, Jamal said, brightening. And Mrs. Chen at the convenience store said I can pick up an extra shift tomorrow night. Rose's face crumpled. You're 16, baby. You should be worrying about homework and girls, not keeping a roof over our heads. And miss out on building my impressive resume? He grinned, trying to coax a smile from her. Besides, I already finished my chemistry lab report. And my college applications are almost done. Harvard would be a fool not to take you, she said, pride momentarily overshadowing worry. Later, as his grandmother slept, Jamal sat at their small kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating his chemistry textbook. He'd skipped the chapter Ms. Winters assigned weeks ago, his mind had already absorbed the concepts, worked through the problems, pushed beyond into territory the class wouldn't cover until spring. Chemistry made sense in a way people didn't. Molecules followed rules. Elements combined in predictable patterns. Unlike Ms. Winters, who looked at him and saw only what she expected to see, never what was actually there. His stomach cramped painfully, and he doubled over, waiting for the wave to pass. Tomorrow he'd figure something out. For now, there was comfort in the elegant equations, in the promise they represented, a future where he could discover medicines that people like his grandmother could actually afford. If he could just hold on long enough to get there. Coach Michael Rivera had seen enough struggling kids during his 15 years at Westridge High to recognize the signs. For weeks, he'd watched Jamal Washington, always first to arrive at gym class and last to leave, his once-fitted gym clothes now hanging from an increasingly gaunt frame. The boy who once dominated basketball drills now leaned against walls between exercises, conserving energy with the careful calculation of someone who knew exactly how much fuel remained in his tank. Today's fainting spell only confirmed what Coach had already suspected. You wanted to see me, Michael. Principal Dr. Marcus Johnson looked up from budget spreadsheets as Coach Rivera entered his office. It's about Jamal Washington, Coach said, closing the door behind him. Something's wrong, Marcus. And it's not what Eleanor Winters is suggesting to anyone who'll listen. Dr. Johnson removed his reading glasses, his expression grave. The drug rumors? I heard those reached the teacher's lounge before Jamal even made it to the nurse's office. That's bull and you know it, Coach said, dropping into a chair. That kid's never been in trouble a day in his life. Perfect attendance until recently. But he's lost at least 15 pounds since semester start. When's the last time you saw him in the cafeteria? Dr. Johnson's brow furrowed. You think he's not eating? I think he can't eat. There's a difference. Coach leaned forward. His emergency contact is his grandmother. No parents listed. The school secretary mentioned something about her being ill. The principal nodded slowly, making the connections. Financial hardship. And unlike some students in similar situations, too proud to ask for help. Or too scared of drawing attention. Coach's voice lowered. You know how the system works, Marcus. One well-intentioned call to child services, and suddenly a kid and his guardian are under a microscope they didn't ask for. The weight of that reality settled between the two men, both products of communities where outside intervention often caused more harm than good, where pride and privacy were sometimes all a family had left. A knock interrupted them. Nurse Patton entered, her normally cheerful face solemn. "Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you should see this." She handed Dr. Johnson a folder. Jamal Washington's records. 3 visits in the past month, dizziness, fatigue. Classic signs of malnutrition. But when I asked about meals, he had all the right answers ready. She tapped the folder. His physical from last year compared to today shows significant weight loss. Blood pressure consistently low. Dr. Johnson scanned the medical notes, his jaw tightening. And Ms. Winters is spreading drug rumors. It gets worse, Nurse Patton continued. I called his emergency contact to come get him today. The grandmother apologized profusely but said she doesn't drive anymore due to medication side effects, and they couldn't afford a rideshare. The boy insisted on returning to class. Where Ms. Winters publicly humiliated him, Coach added. Dr. Johnson's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Yes. Send her in. He looked up at his colleagues. Speaking of Ms. Winters. The chemistry teacher entered, pearl necklace perfectly aligned, not a platinum hair out of place. She nodded curtly to Coach and Nurse Patton before addressing the principal. Dr. Johnson, I need to discuss the Washington situation. As educators, we have a responsibility to address warning signs of substance abuse, and today's incident. Eleanor, Dr. Johnson interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Have you reviewed Jamal's academic record? She blinked, momentarily thrown. Well, no, but, perfect attendance until recently. 4.0 GPA. His standardized test scores place him in the top 0.5% nationally. Last year's chemistry department award. Does that sound like a student with a drug problem to you? Ms. Winters' lips thinned. Appearances can be deceiving. And there's clearly something wrong with the boy. Yes, Dr. Johnson agreed, there is. Coach Rivera watched the chemistry teacher's face, searching for a glimmer of concern for the student rather than for rules and appearances. He found none. I've initiated the protocol for suspected substance abuse, Ms. Winters continued. I've already informed the other faculty members to be vigilant. You've gossiped about unsubstantiated suspicions regarding a minor, Dr. Johnson corrected, his patience visibly thinning. And you've done so without consulting his academic record, his medical information, or me. That stops now. Ms. Winters drew herself up. I hardly think concern for student welfare constitutes gossip. And I hardly think publicly suggesting a student has improper home training constitutes concern, Coach countered, unable to contain himself. The principal raised a hand to calm tensions. Eleanor, I'm handling Jamal's situation personally from now on. I'll need his complete attendance and grade reports from your class. Of course, she replied stiffly. Though I maintain that my concerns are valid. The boy is clearly hiding something. After she left, silence settled over the office before Nurse Patton spoke. She's right about one thing, that boy is hiding something. The question is what we do now that we suspect what it is. Dr. Johnson stared thoughtfully at Jamal's file. First, we gather facts. Discreetly. Without making assumptions like Eleanor did. He looked at his colleagues. The last thing that young man needs is more people deciding who he is without bothering to find out the truth. Coach Rivera nodded in agreement, thinking of Jamal's face as he'd helped him to the nurse's office, the shame there, yes, but also determination. The look of someone who'd been carrying a weight alone for too long. Whatever's going on with Jamal Washington, Dr. Johnson said with quiet resolve, we're going to make sure he knows he's not alone anymore. The whispers followed Jamal like shadows as he walked through Westridge High's hallways the next morning. Fragments of conversation cut through the usual chatter, fainting spell, drug testing, Ms. Winters said, each word another small wound. He kept his eyes fixed on the scuffed tile floor, counting steps to maintain focus, to remind himself why he was here despite everything. 627 more days until graduation. Until escape became possible. Jamal slid into his seat in chemistry class 3 minutes early, as always. The room gradually filled, students giving his desk a wider berth than before. Only Tiffany Blake's gaze lingered on him, her expression unreadable where yesterday it had been dismissive. Ms. Winters entered exactly as the bell rang, her heels clicking a precise rhythm. "Pop quiz," she announced, her eyes landing on Jamal with something like anticipation. "Let's see who reviewed the material I assigned." Papers rustled as the quiz was distributed. Jamal stared at the problems, balancing complex equations, predicting reaction products, calculating enthalpy changes. They were far beyond what the class had covered, venturing into territory reserved for next semester. His empty stomach twisted, but this time with recognition. This wasn't a test of their knowledge. It was a test designed for him to fail. Beside him, Marcus Chun muttered, "What the hell? We haven't even learned this stuff." Jamal bent over his paper, pencil moving steadily. The equations spoke to him in a language more familiar than English, a dialect of certainty in a world where nothing else was guaranteed. One by one, he solved the problems, showing his work with methodical precision despite the tremor in his hands. 20 minutes later, Ms. Winters called time. "Pass your papers forward," she instructed, her voice carrying that edge of satisfaction that came when she believed she'd made her point. "While I grade these, please read chapter 14. The rustle of turning pages filled the room as students found the chapter, most seeing it for the first time. Ms. Winters settled at her desk, red pen poised like a weapon as she began marking quizzes. Jamal watched her expression shift as she reached his paper, the slight widening of eyes, the purse of lips, the furrow forming between her brows. She looked up, meeting his gaze with cold assessment. "Mr. Washington," she said, voice carrying across the now silent classroom, "would you care to explain how you've managed to answer advanced organic chemistry questions when you can barely stay conscious in my class?" The accusation hung in the air, its meaning clear to everyone. Cheating. Another mark against him. "I read ahead, Ms. Winters." His voice emerged steadier than he expected. "Chapter 14, and the 3 after it." "Indeed." Her tone dripped disbelief. "And I suppose you simply intuited the reaction mechanisms I haven't yet taught." Something flickered in Jamal, a small flame of defiance that hunger and exhaustion couldn't quite extinguish. "No, ma'am. I watched MIT's open courseware lectures on organic chemistry last summer. Professor Zhang explains carbonyl reactions really clearly." A ripple of murmurs spread through the classroom. Ms. Winters' face tightened, caught between doubt and the dawning realization that she might have miscalculated. "See me after class, Mr. Washington." As she turned back to the quizzes, Jamal felt eyes on him. Tiffany Blake was staring, her perfectly glossed lips slightly parted in surprise. For the first time, she was seeing him, not the shabby clothes or the too thin frame, but the mind that had just challenged a teacher who'd built her reputation on being unassailable. By the end of the period, whispers had taken on a different tone. No longer accusations, but questions. And questions, Jamal knew from science, were where all discovery began. Principal Marcus Johnson had never intended to be at school at 9:37 p.m. on a Thursday. Budget proposals and next year's staffing plans had kept him hunched over his computer long after the building had emptied of its daily commotion. The silence of the school at night always struck him as both peaceful and slightly melancholy, like an empty stage between performances, holding memories of the day's dramas while waiting for tomorrow's. The soft, rhythmic swish of a mop from the hallway caught his attention. The night cleaning crew wasn't scheduled until 10:30. Curious, he rose from his desk and walked toward the sound. The sight stopped him in the doorway, Jamal Washington, headphones in, moving methodically down the hallway with a mop, his thin frame casting a long shadow under the half-dimmed lights. The boy's movements had an efficiency born of practice, yet there was something almost meditative in his rhythm, as if the simple, physical task provided relief from other, heavier burdens. "Jamal." The boy startled, nearly dropping the mop as he yanked out his earbuds. "Dr. Johnson." I didn't." His eyes darted to the clock on the wall, fear flashing across his features. "Am I not supposed to be here?" Mr. Diaz said it was okay as long as I finished the West Wing classrooms by 10. Understanding dawned. You're working as part of the janitorial staff. Jamal's chin lifted slightly. 3 nights a week. Just started last month. The pride in his voice thinly veiled his defensiveness. It's all legal. I have working papers. Dr. Johnson nodded slowly, seeing pieces of the puzzle lock into place. I have no doubt it's above board, Jamal. I'm just surprised. Between your course load and your academic record, when do you sleep? The question wasn't accusatory, but Jamal answered as if defending himself in court. I average 5.2 hours on weeknights. More on weekends when I don't have the stockroom shift at Robertson's Market. He hesitated, then added quietly, it's enough. The principal gestured to his office. Would you take a break for a few minutes? I'd like to talk with you. Wariness flickered across Jamal's face, but he nodded, carefully setting the mop in its bucket before following Dr. Johnson. Inside the office, the principal noticed how Jamal perched on the edge of the chair, as if ready to flee at the first sign of trouble. Dr. Johnson settled behind his desk, deliberately keeping his posture relaxed. I'm concerned about what happened in Ms. Winter's class yesterday, he began. I'm sorry about that, sir. Jamal's response came quickly, practiced. It won't happen again. That's not, Dr. Johnson paused, recalibrating. Jamal, you're not in trouble. I'm concerned about you, not about a disruption to a class. The boy's expression remained carefully neutral, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Years of experience told Dr. Johnson that Jamal had learned the hard way not to trust easy assurances from authority figures. How's your grandmother doing? He asked, changing tack. Surprise flickered across Jamal's face before he composed it again. She's managing. The new medication helps with the pain, but the side effects are rough. And financially? A long pause stretched between them. We make it work, Jamal finally said, each word measured. Dr. Johnson nodded, then reached for a folder on his desk. I looked at your academic record today. It's exceptional, Jamal. Truly exceptional. Your teachers, most of them anyway, speak of your work with remarkable praise. Something shifted in Jamal's posture, a barely perceptible straightening of his spine, a flicker of light in his eyes. Your AP calculus teacher mentioned you've been helping tutor other students. And I see you've already taken the SAT twice. 1570, Jamal said softly. Second time. Dr. Johnson let out a low whistle. That's remarkable. Have you applied to colleges? 7 so far. All the Ivies except Dartmouth. MIT. Stanford. Georgia Tech as my safety. The words tumbled out now, as if Jamal had been holding them inside for too long, these dreams too precious to share casually. I've already heard back unofficially from Harvard and Yale. They're interested. Very interested. But? Dr. Johnson sensed the unspoken obstacle. Jamal's gaze dropped to his worn sneakers. Even with full academic scholarships, there are costs. Housing during breaks. Books. Supplies. His voice lowered. And grandma. I can't leave her alone with no income. The disability checks barely cover rent. The principal leaned forward. Jamal, there are resources, we've tried. The edge in the boy's voice cut through the office air. Every program, every application, every system designed to help people like us comes with strings, with humiliations, with ways to make you prove over and over that you're poor enough to deserve help but not so poor that you're beyond helping. He took a deep breath. I'm sorry. That was disrespectful. No, Dr. Johnson said quietly. That was honest. And I appreciate honesty. He paused, studying the extraordinary young man before him. Can I ask you something else? What are you working on in your spare time? Mr. Abernathy mentioned seeing you in the library research section with some pretty advanced chemistry journals. For the first time, a genuine smile transformed Jamal's face, small but radiant, like sun breaking through heavy clouds. It's a modification of existing syntheses for calcium channel blockers, the medication Grandma takes for her heart. The current manufacturing process is needlessly complex, which drives up costs. I think I've found a way to simplify it while maintaining efficacy. Dr. Johnson blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. That's not a typical high school science project. Jamal's smile widened a fraction. No, sir. It's not. For just a moment, pride overtook caution in his eyes. It could matter, Dr. Johnson. It could actually help people. If I can just get someone to look at my research. Looking at him now, this brilliant, determined young man who somehow maintained his humanity and hope despite every obstacle, Dr. Johnson felt something shift within his chest. No longer was this just about helping a struggling student. This was about recognizing that sometimes, greatness walks quietly through school hallways, head down, bearing burdens no child should carry, just waiting for someone to notice. The teacher's lounge hummed with morning conversations and the aroma of burned coffee when Dr. Johnson entered, Eleanor Winter's personnel file tucked under his arm. The chemistry teacher sat in her usual corner chair, stirring her tea with precise movements, her back straight as a ruler. "Eleanor," he said pleasantly, "might I have a word?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Marcus." They moved to the small conference nook at the far end of the lounge. Through the glass partition, Dr. Johnson could see other faculty members pretending not to watch. Word of Jamal's fainting spell and the subsequent rumors had traveled through the school's ecosystem with predictable speed. "I'd like to discuss Jamal Washington," he began, keeping his voice even. Ms. Winters set her teacup down with a delicate clink. "I presumed as much. Have the drug test results come back yet?" "There will be no drug test, Eleanor." He held her gaze steadily. "There was never any evidence to warrant one." "With all due respect," she replied, her tone suggesting respect was the furthest thing from her mind, "a student who suddenly begins exhibiting erratic behavior, a student who fainted from hunger," Dr. Johnson corrected. "A brilliant young man who works 3 jobs to support his ailing grandmother while maintaining a perfect GPA and conducting college-level research." Ms. Winters' expression tightened. "If that's the case, why wouldn't he simply say so? There are free lunch programs, which require paperwork that could trigger investigations into his grandmother's ability to care for him." Dr. Johnson kept his voice low but firm. "Eleanor, have you ever truly looked at Jamal? Not at his circumstances or your assumptions about them, but at his work? At his mind?" He slid a paper across the table, Jamal's most recent chemistry exam, marked with a reluctant 98%. "You've consistently given him the highest grades in your class, yet you've never once recognized his exceptional talent. Why is that?" Color rose in Ms. Winters' cheeks. "Are you accusing me of something, Marcus?" "I'm asking you to reflect. On your words in class the other day. On the rumors you've helped spread." "I was concerned, were you?" He leaned forward slightly. "Or were you uncomfortable with a student who defies your expectations? Who excels despite lacking the advantages you believe are necessary for success?" Ms. Winters' mouth opened, then closed. Through the glass partition, Dr. Johnson noticed Tiffany Blake passing by, slowing as she spotted them in intense conversation. "The science fair is in 3 weeks, Dr. Johnson continued. Jamal has a project that could genuinely change lives. I expect your full support, Eleanor. Not because I'm ordering it, but because it's what any educator worthy of the title would offer a student of his caliber." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You've made your point, Marcus." "Have I?" He stood, tucking Jamal's exam back into the folder. "Because from where I stand, this isn't about points scored in an argument. It's about a young man's future. And about what kind of people we choose to be when faced with both our students' struggles and their brilliance." As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of Tiffany Blake's face through the glass, wide-eyed, her expression shifting from curiosity to something deeper and more troubled. She hurried away as his eyes met hers, but Dr. Johnson suspected the conversation had found another witness. Perhaps, he reflected, that wasn't such a bad thing. Sometimes change needed witnesses, people who would carry what they'd seen into wider circles, who would begin asking the questions that needed asking. What he didn't yet know was how quickly those questions would spread, or how dramatically the answers would transform not just Jamal's life, but the entire fabric of Westridge High. The gymnasium transformed over a single weekend, sterile white tables arranged in perfect rows where basketball hoops usually reigned. Morning light filtered through high windows, casting hopeful patterns across trifold presentation boards and carefully labeled experiments. For most students, the annual Westridge Science Fair represented 2 weeks of hasty research and parental assistance. For Jamal Washington, it represented everything. He arrived at 6:15 a.m., 3 hours before the official opening, his precious research materials balanced in a cardboard box reinforced with duct tape. The building's silence embraced him like an old friend as he made his way to his assigned table, back corner, easily overlooked, exactly as Ms. Winters had arranged when assigning locations. His hands trembled slightly as he unpacked his modest display. No glossy color printing or professionally bound reports like his classmates would have. Just meticulously handwritten notes, hand-drawn molecular diagrams, and a small collection of test tubes containing various stages of his synthesized compound, each one representing countless late nights hunched over chemistry textbooks borrowed through interlibrary loan, each formula a step closer to the medicine that could help not just his grandmother, but countless others who couldn't afford astronomical pharmaceutical prices. Need a hand? Jamal startled at the voice behind him. Tiffany Blake stood awkwardly, clutching a stack of papers. What are you doing here so early?" he asked. She shifted her weight, eyes not quite meeting his. "I heard Dr. Johnson talking to Ms. Winters. About you." Her voice softened. "And then I did some research. On calcium channel blockers and their synthesis." "You did?" "I didn't understand half of it," she admitted with a small laugh. "But I understood enough to know that what you're doing is important." She held out the papers. "My dad works at Kinko's. I had him print these for your presentation. Color graphs look better than pencil." The gesture, so unexpected, left Jamal momentarily speechless. He accepted the papers, perfect color renderings of his painstaking calculations and molecular structures. "Why?" he finally managed. Something complicated passed across Tiffany's face, shame, perhaps, or the dawning of awareness that comes when privilege confronts its own assumptions. "Because I was wrong about you," she said simply. "And I'm sorry." As morning progressed, the gymnasium filled with students, teachers, parents, and judges. The air buzzed with nervous energy and the peculiar mix of cleaning chemicals and adolescent anxiety that accompanies school events. Jamal stood beside his display, stomach knotting with hunger and anticipation. Ms. Winters made her rounds, clipboard in hand, offering perfunctory nods to most students while lavishing attention on her favorites. When she reached Jamal's table, her eyes narrowed at the professionally printed materials. "Quite the upgrade, Mr. Washington," she remarked, voice honey-coated with suspicion. "I do hope all this work is original." "Every calculation," he confirmed quietly. "Every synthesis step." She made a note on her clipboard. "Well, the judges will determine that, I suppose." As she moved away, Jamal noticed Dr. Johnson entering the gymnasium with an elegant Asian woman in a tailored suit. The principal caught his eye and nodded encouragingly before guiding his companion through the displays. "That's Dr. Samantha Chen," Tiffany whispered, suddenly beside him again. "The district superintendent. My mom says she used to be some hotshot research scientist before going into education." Jamal's heart hammered against his ribs. Dr. Chen wasn't just any scientist, she was the author of 3 papers he'd referenced in his research, a pioneer in pharmaceutical development who'd left the private sector to reform science education. As the judging began, Ms. Winters hovered near her favorite students, subtly directing judges toward projects she deemed worthy. When a judge approached Jamal's table, she materialized beside them. "Perhaps you'd like to see Mitchell's solar battery design first," she suggested smoothly. "Jamal's project is rather theoretical." But the judge, a chemistry professor from the local community college, was already leaning forward, eyes widening as he examined Jamal's synthesis pathway. "This is remarkable," he murmured. "You've eliminated 3 steps from the standard process." Ms. Winter's smile tightened. "Well, in theory, perhaps, but not theory," Jamal said quietly, indicating his test tubes. "I've synthesized small amounts of each intermediate compound. The final product shows 94% purity in spectroscopic analysis." The judge looked up sharply. "You ran spectroscopic analysis? Where?" "Dr. Abernathy let me use the equipment at Westridge Community College on Saturdays," Jamal explained. "I've logged 56 hours in their lab since September." As more judges gathered, drawn by the first one's evident excitement, Ms. Winter's attempts to redirect attention grew increasingly desperate. But the truth of Jamal's work, its elegance, its practicality, its potential impact, spoke louder than her interference. And from across the gymnasium, Dr. Chen watched with growing interest, her trained scientist's eye recognizing something extraordinary unfolding in the most unlikely corner of a high school science fair. The afternoon sun slanted through the gymnasium windows, turning dust motes into dancing constellations above the science fair's crowded aisles. Judges had completed their rounds, students breathed collective sighs of relief, and parents mingled while awaiting the awards announcement. In the back corner, Jamal found himself surrounded by an unexpected crowd of university representatives, local scientists, and wide-eyed classmates, all drawn by the whispers spreading through the room about the pharmaceutical breakthrough at table 32. Dr. Chen had spent 45 minutes at his station, her questions piercing and precise, each one revealing the depth of her understanding and the scope of her interest. Now she stood with Dr. Johnson and a small cluster of administrators, their heads bent in serious conversation, occasionally glancing Jamal's way. "This could streamline production costs by nearly 60%, one college professor was saying, carefully examining Jamal's synthesis chart. "Have you considered applying for a patent?" Jamal shook his head, the very concept so far beyond his reality it might as well have been written in another language. "Patents cost money. I just want to make the medicine cheaper." A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the listeners, this simple statement revealing a motivation purer than the academic and financial ambitions that typically drove such innovations. From the corner of his eye, Jamal spotted Ms. Winters approaching with determined steps, her clipboard clutched like a shield against the enthusiasm surrounding his project. "I see you've all discovered my promising student," she announced, voice raised to carry. "I've been mentoring Jamal on this project for months now. Such potential, when properly guided." The silence that followed hung suspended, as tangible as the chemical compounds in Jamal's test tubes. He stared at his teacher, a complicated mixture of emotions washing through him, disbelief, anger, a lifetime of learned caution about challenging authority figures who held power over his future. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "That's not true." Tiffany Blake stepped forward, chin raised in defiance of the teacher she'd spent 4 years trying to impress. "You've been spreading rumors about him. You tried to humiliate him in class. You assigned him the worst table location for the science fair. Each accusation emerged stronger than the last. I heard you telling Dr. Johnson that Jamal probably plagiarized his research." Ms. Winters' face drained of color. "Tiffany Blake, this is entirely inappropriate." "What's inappropriate," came Dr. Chen's voice as she joined the group, "is taking credit for exceptional work you not only failed to support but actively attempted to undermine." Her gaze, analytical and uncompromising, fixed on the chemistry teacher. "Especially when that work builds upon research I'm intimately familiar with, having contributed to the foundation myself." A collective intake of breath swept through the onlookers. Ms. Winter's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling around her. Dr. Chen turned to Jamal, her expression softening. "Your modifications to the third-stage synthesis are particularly elegant. It's an approach several pharmaceutical researchers have attempted, but the stability issues seemed insurmountable. The stability comes from introducing a phosphate buffer during transition, Jamal explained, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke the language of science, a language where he belonged, regardless of his circumstances. It maintains optimal pH through the reaction sequence. As he spoke, describing complex chemical interactions with the fluency of a seasoned researcher, the gymnasium seemed to fade away. Gone was the self-consciousness about his worn clothes, the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, the weight of others' assumptions. In this moment, he was simply a scientist speaking to another scientist, equal in the democracy of ideas. Dr. Johnson watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction, noting how the crowd around Jamal had grown to include students who'd previously avoided him, teachers who'd overlooked him, community members who'd never noticed him. Something important was happening, not just the recognition of a young scientist's breakthrough, but the visible dismantling of preconceptions about who could achieve such things and what brilliance looked like. "I'd like to offer you an internship in our university's research division this summer," Dr. Chen said as Jamal finished his explanation. "With proper laboratory access, we could develop this synthesis method further, perhaps even prepare it for clinical trials." The world seemed to tilt beneath Jamal's feet. I'd need to work, though. My grandmother. This would be a paid position, Dr. Chen clarified. With potential for scholarship support beyond that. As this new reality settled around him, Jamal became aware of Ms. Winters slipping away, her clipboard hanging limply at her side, her authority diminished in the wake of truth. Part of him, the part shaped by years of swallowing injustice to survive, felt a flash of vindication. But a larger part recognized her retreat for what it was, the painful collapse of barriers built from bias and assumption. And in that moment, standing amid unexpected acclaim with possibilities suddenly blooming where obstacles had stood, Jamal understood that the most meaningful victory wasn't proving Ms. Winters wrong. It was the opportunity to make his research matter, to transform his grandmother's struggle into something that might ease the path for others. "I'd like that very much," he told Dr. Chen, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Thank you." Monday morning dawned with the surreal quality that follows life-altering events. Jamal walked through Westridge High's front doors clutching the science fair's grand prize trophy, a modest plastic and metal affair that somehow weighed both nothing and everything in his hands. The weekend had passed in a blur of phone calls, paperwork for Dr. Chen's internship program, and his grandmother's tears of joy and pride. But nothing had prepared him for what awaited inside. The usual morning chaos paused as he entered, conversation stuttering into silence before resuming with increased intensity. Eyes followed him down the hallway, not with the previous mixture of indifference and judgment, but with a new awareness that made his skin prickle with uncomfortable visibility. "Washington." Coach Rivera's deep voice boomed across the lobby. The physical education teacher strode toward him, hand extended. "Man of the hour. Dr. Johnson wants to see you." "Principal's office." Jamal's stomach clenched with instinctive anxiety. Despite everything, a lifetime of experience had taught him that being summoned by authority rarely ended well for people like him. "It's good news, son," Coach added, noticing his hesitation. "Trust me." The principal's office door stood open, revealing a gathering that stole Jamal's breath: Dr. Johnson, Dr. Chen, the superintendent, 2 school board members, and in the corner, trembling slightly, his grandmother rose in her Sunday dress, looking simultaneously proud and terrified to be in such official surroundings. "Grandma?" Jamal rushed to her side. "What are you doing here? How did you?" "These nice people sent a car," she explained, clutching his hand. "Said it was important. That you weren't in any trouble." The question in her eyes asked if this was true. "No trouble at all, Mrs. Washington," Dr. Johnson assured her, gesturing toward the chairs. "Quite the opposite." As they settled, Jamal noticed the local newspaper on the principal's desk, his science fair project featured prominently on the front page of the Sunday edition. The headline read, "Local students' breakthrough could slash cost of vital heart medication." "Your grandson," Dr. Chen began, addressing Rose directly, "has accomplished something extraordinary." His research has the potential to make certain medications significantly more affordable and accessible, including the one you take. Rose's eyes widened, turning to Jamal with newfound understanding. Is that what all those chemistry books were for? All those Saturdays at the college? He nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. But that's not all we've gathered to discuss, Dr. Johnson continued. He slid a folder across the desk. Jamal, these are forms for our district's exceptional needs program. It provides comprehensive support for students facing extraordinary circumstances, food assistance, academic resources, family support services, all confidential, with no risk to your current living situation. We should have identified your eligibility months ago, the superintendent added, regret evident in her voice. The system failed you, despite having resources specifically designed for situations like yours. And I bear much of that responsibility, Dr. Johnson admitted. Signs were there, but we didn't see them, or chose not to see them, until your collapse forced us to look. The raw honesty in the admission hung in the air, acknowledging a deeper truth. How many students like Jamal moved through the education system unseen, their potential buried beneath assumptions and systemic blindness? Rose straightened in her chair, dignity overcoming her initial intimidation. My grandson has never wanted to be anyone's charity case. This isn't charity, Mrs. Washington, Dr. Chen said firmly. This is investment in exceptional talent. The kind of talent our communities and our world desperately need. She turned to Jamal. Your synthesis method doesn't just make one medication more affordable. The pathway you've developed could potentially apply to dozens of similar compounds. That's not just academic success, it's meaningful change. As the meeting continued, each person explaining different aspects of the support being arranged, meal programs that would function through a universal student card to eliminate stigma, transportation assistance, adjusted work schedules that wouldn't compromise his research opportunities, Jamal felt something shift within his chest. The heavy stone of responsibility he'd carried for so long didn't disappear, but somehow its weight redistributed, shared now among many hands. When they finally emerged from the office an hour later, the hallway had filled with students changing classes. But instead of the usual indifferent flow, a small crowd had gathered, Tiffany Blake, several science club members, basketball teammates who'd wondered why Jamal had quit the team despite his talent. Is it true? One boy asked eagerly. The newspaper says your chemistry thing could save people thousands of dollars on heart medicine. Before Jamal could answer, Rose spoke, her voice carrying the musical cadence that emerged when emotion overcame her usual reserve. My grandson, she said, each word rippling with pride, has been working 3 jobs and maintaining a 4.0 while developing a chemical process that might help people who can't afford their medicine. Her eyes swept the gathering crowd, finding Ms. Winters hovering at its edge. All while certain folks were spreading rumors instead of seeing what was right in front of them. The chemistry teacher's face flushed, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped forward, the movement clearly costing her considerable effort. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Washington, she said, voice uncharacteristically humble. I failed to see your grandson's extraordinary gifts because I was looking through a lens of my own preconceptions. She turned to Jamal. I owe you an apology, Mr. Washington. A public one, to match the public disrespect I showed you. The corridor fell silent, the unexpectedness of her admission creating a moment suspended between past wrongs and possible reconciliation. Jamal studied his teacher's face, seeing beyond the embarrassment to something more complicated, the painful recognition of one's own biases, the first tentative step toward change. We all have blind spots, Ms. Winters, he said finally. Even me. What matters is what we do once we recognize them. Dr. Johnson, watching this exchange, recognized its significance, not just for Jamal and Ms. Winters, but for every student witnessing it. In that moment, Westridge High was being offered a mirror, a chance to see itself clearly and choose a different way forward. As the bell rang and students reluctantly dispersed to classes, Jamal turned back to his grandmother, who stood tall despite her arthritis, fierce pride illuminating her face. You know what this means, right? He asked softly, thinking of the internship, the scholarship possibilities, the sudden clearing of obstacles that had seemed insurmountable just days before. Rose took his hand, her work-worn fingers wrapping around his with gentle strength. "It means you get to become who you were always meant to be," she said. "And the world better get ready. 6 months can change everything." The May sunshine bathed Westridge High's courtyard in golden light as students gathered for the year-end award ceremony. Chairs arranged in neat rows slowly filled with families, teachers, and community members, some who had never before set foot on campus now drawn by the story that had spread far beyond school boundaries. Jamal Washington sat beside his grandmother in the front row, both barely recognizing their transformed reality. Rose, now receiving proper medical care through a community health initiative sparked by Jamal's research, had color in her cheeks again. The constant pain that had etched permanent lines around her eyes had softened. Beside her, Jamal had filled out, his frame no longer gaunt, his eyes clear and focused rather than shadowed by exhaustion. Dr. Johnson approached the podium, surveying the gathered crowd with quiet satisfaction. "Today marks not just the end of a school year," he began, "but the beginning of a new chapter for Westridge High." His gaze found Jamal, a smile ghosting across his features before he continued. "6 months ago, we witnessed something remarkable, not just a scientific breakthrough from an exceptional young mind, but a breakthrough in our community's understanding of itself." When Jamal Washington's research caught the attention of the medical community, he didn't just advance pharmaceutical science. He held up a mirror to our school, our systems, and our assumptions. In the second row, Ms. Winters sat with hands clasped tightly in her lap. The past months had changed her too, humility softening the sharp edges of her certainty, her classroom practices evolving as she worked with a diversity consultant to recognize and address her biases. The transformation hadn't been painless, but it had been genuine. "Since then," Dr. Johnson continued, "we've established the Washington Scholarship for students facing extraordinary barriers. We've implemented a universal meal program that ensures no student goes hungry while trying to learn. And 28 local businesses have joined our internship initiative, creating paid opportunities for students to develop their talents regardless of economic circumstances." Rose reached for Jamal's hand, her fingers squeezing his with fierce pride. Dr. Chen rose to join the principal, carrying an official-looking document. "I'm pleased to announce that the synthesis method developed by Jamal Washington has been granted preliminary patent approval," she announced. "As agreed, all proceeds from licensing will fund the newly established Westridge Science Opportunity Fund, ensuring that financial barriers never again prevent brilliant minds from reaching their potential." The audience erupted in applause, but Jamal's attention caught on a small group entering at the back, 3 younger students being ushered in by Tiffany BLAK, who now headed the school's new peer mentoring program. The children, clearly from challenging backgrounds, blinked in surprise at being guided to saved seats in the middle section. This, Jamal realized, was his true legacy, not just a chemical formula or a scholarship bearing his name, but the shift in seeing possibility where others saw only problems. The willingness to look deeper, to question assumptions, to recognize the invisible barriers that too often determined who succeeded and who struggled. As he walked across the stage moments later to accept his diploma, one of 3 seniors graduating with full university scholarships, Jamal thought of his younger self mopping these hallways late at night, believing he had to carry his burdens alone. "Remember," he said, pausing at the microphone, his voice steady and sure, "brilliance doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's hiding behind hunger, or exhaustion, or circumstances we can't imagine. The question isn't whether it exists, it's whether we have the courage to see it, nurture it, and stand beside it until it can shine for all the world to recognize." Dear friend, your heart just witnessed how easily we overlook extraordinary potential when it doesn't come in the packages we expect. Today, thousands of students like Jamal sit in classrooms across the world, brilliant minds constrained by circumstances, not capability. Their stories deserve to be told, their talents recognized. By sharing this video, you become part of a movement that challenges us to look deeper, to see beyond our assumptions, and to create communities where every child can thrive regardless of their starting point. Like this video to help this message reach those who need to hear it most, and subscribe to join a community committed to shining light on hidden potential.